welcome to the PeakDay podcast, where we discuss fertility and natural family planning with our friends. Today's guest is Ann Koshut. Ann is co-founder of Springs in the Desert, a Catholic ministry accompanying couples carrying the difficult burden of infertility, pointing them towards Christ and the unique fruitfulness to which He has called them. She holds a Master of Theological Studies from the Pontifical John Paul II Institute for Studies on Marriage and the Family at the Catholic University of America. In addition to her work as Executive Director of Springs in the Desert, she also writes and speaks at conferences, retreats, and pre-Cana programs. In 2021, Ann was appointed to the USCCB's National Advisory Council. She and her husband, Keith, live in central Pennsylvania and are Byzantine Catholics who were married in 2011. Hello, Ann. Thank you for joining us on the Peak podcast.
Hi, Martha. It's so great to be with you.
Thank you so much for spending time with us and talking about your life journey and your beautiful ministry of Springs in the Desert. So I'm sure it will be appreciated by a lot of our listeners. So talk to us about getting married later in life. Like, what were your life circumstances and how did you ultimately meet your husband?
I was a cradle Catholic. I was a theater major in college. So my life kind of took a lot of twists and turns. I was involved in a lot of different things until I was finally called to study theology. That was totally the Holy Spirit, not me at all. But he brought me to the JP2 Institute, and that took me to the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, where I was actually working in the family life office doing marriage prep. And so I was a single woman who was doing marriage prep, but it was so beautiful. And I'll tell you, I had the best marriage prep for a number of years while I was there at the Archdiocese before I finally met my husband. So it's kind of a funny story. He was living in Pittsburgh. I was living in Philadelphia. My parents were living in central Pennsylvania, and a friend of his from college was living in DC. But we all were associated with our parish here in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, St. Anne's. And so I would come home every summer for our parish festival, and I would just help out at the festival, bussing tables or doing whatever they needed. And this particular summer in 2009, I took some pictures at the festival and I put them on Facebook. And Rich just saw the pictures and said to Keith, "Hey, this girl isn't married. Her brother is a priest. They're a good family. I think maybe you guys would make a match." And so that's how it happened. Keith actually met a friend of mine first, asked for my number, and I said, "Give him my email address, just in case. That way I can shake him a little more easily." So he actually emailed me on September 8th of 2009, which of course is the Blessed Mother's birthday. And so we really consider her to be essentially our matchmaker. Rich certainly helped, but I think he was just Mary's kind of envoy. And so that's how it started. We met in 2009 and we were married in 2011.
So, as you said, you had had a lot of training in natural family planning, and so you had a bit maybe more knowledge maybe than your husband. So, how was that a part of your conversation during your engagement?
Every month I was hearing the NFP and human sexuality talk, so that was really pretty deeply ingrained in me. Also from my formation at the JP2 Institute. But, Keith and I really were on the same page in terms of family. And I'll just get it out of the way here. I am the youngest of two, and he's the youngest of 16. So there was kind of no question that we wanted to have a family. But when we met, I was 42 and he was 44. So, I mean, we knew that we weren't going to have a large family. But we were definitely on the same page. And in our conversations, we talked about that openness to children. We definitely wanted to have them. And yeah, there was just no question. As far as natural family planning, I mean, of course he had heard of it. But he didn't have any kind of depth of knowledge about it. But we knew from the very beginning that we would be open to life, especially because we were older, and that we definitely wouldn't use anything that went against the teachings of the church, whether it was in terms of contraception or if it came to that, artificial reproductive technologies. So I had taken a symptothermal course during my time working at the Archdiocese, just so that I would be familiar with it. So I took a course on the symptothermal method. When we got married, I didn't take another course before we got married, but after we got married, there weren't any particular issues, but because of our age, so by this time now I'm 44, he's 46. And I just thought, it's probably not a bad idea to get together with a doctor who is, familiar with treating infertility or with working, with women who are older. And so that's when we learned the Creighton method, and we started, utilizing that and seeing a physician who was instructed in NAPRO. And as it turned out, we never were able to get pregnant.
So how did your conversations evolve as went, month after month with, with the negative pregnancy test?
So I'm so fortunate that I have such a beautiful and supportive husband, and he was right along with me, helping me to chart and doing all of those things, going to the doctor with me. Um, we men and women handle uh, everything basically differently. But particularly when there's something like this that's so kind of personal to each of us, like so internal, because it's about our bodies and how our bodies are working individually, and then as we come together. And so it was difficult. I was very often quite emotional and crying and those kinds of things. My husband is sensitive, but he wasn't the person to sort of burst into tears all the time. Very loving, very supportive. I'm so fortunate that he didn't, kind of say, "All right, it's time to get over it." He was really with me every step of the way. Uh, but we had to have that conversation about, okay, do we keep trying? How far do we push treatment? At what point do we have to say it's enough on my body? Or yeah, you have to have those conversations, just like you do when you're practicing NFP to postpone conception. When you're dealing with infertility, there really is a way that your communication has to be really good. I mean, you have to work at being able to talk with each other and share your feelings. And okay, where are we right now? And what does it look like if we take a break? Or what does it look like if we keep going? So it's so interesting. It's kind of this mixed bag that I can see now. It was hard, but I can see the gifts that we were given during that time too, the ways that God was really shaping us in our marriage. Not at all something you can see when you're going through it, but you can look back and see, okay, I see where God was at work in our marriage.
So what was the point where the idea of Springs in the Desert entered the picture?
It was sort of in the midst of that, as the years were going on, and it was negative tests and then all these other circumstances that were happening, where you kind of look around and you say, Lord, what are you doing? What's happening here? We don't understand uh, what what you're trying to do with our marriage. Totally kind of upending our expectations for what we had thought, and a very isolating experience. And so, um, I had support from people, a lot of priests that I knew, friends, but they were all giving us solutions. And so they were saying, some of them said, why don't you just adopt? Other people were saying, well, try this and do that diet and uh, pray to this saint, do this novena, make this pilgrimage. I mean, all of those things are really wonderful, but there was no one who just looked at us and said, gosh, I'm so sorry. This is hard. But you know what? Your marriage is beautiful. And I was beginning to think that there was no one that I would hear that from. And I happened to be at a conference and I reconnected with a friend, Kimberly Henkel, who had also gone to the JP2 Institute. And she began to share how she and her husband also were unable to get pregnant. And so we just started to commiserate with each other. And suddenly she was sharing the same kinds of feelings and emotions that I was having, the feelings of jealousy or anger, or, I can't pray, or whatever it might be. And so that was an ongoing conversation. And in 2019, she was asked to write an article for the online journal of the JP2 Institute called Humanum. And she said, will you write the article with me? And so we wrote it together we entitled it Springs in the Desert. And she said, okay, now that we wrote the article, we should probably have a website so that people could go. And I'm like, okay, great. I don't know what's going to be on the website, but sure, let's get a website. And so we did that. And it was just a blog. And the article was published. So we posted the article on the website. And we had one thing to put there. We wrote some blog posts, and before we knew it, there were people coming to us and saying, oh my gosh, you're saying exactly what I'm feeling in my heart. And that's really how it started. So that was 2019. We incorporated as a 501c3. And yeah, we were the completely unwitting uh, ministry people. We had no we really started the ministry for ourselves. I think it was really born out of friendship and out of necessity, because we could at least lean on each other and we didn't feel so isolated anymore. Turns out there's a lot of people who are feeling that same kind of isolation, and now they have a place, kind of a community to come.
So, ministering to families that are experiencing infertility,
Mhm.
what difference does having the support that Springs in the Desert provides?
I mean, I think it makes all the difference in the world because, as I said, there's this isolation. So you can feel sort of isolated within your own family. I mean, here I have a husband who has 15 siblings. So, you can begin to feel kind of inadequate, right? Or maybe people in the family don't quite understand. They want to be supportive, but they may not quite understand, right? Then you can feel very isolated within the parish, especially if you are coming to church every week as a couple, and then you see pews that are filled with children, right? And our priests, I think, they very much mean well, but they don't always know how to minister to us. And again, they sort of want to give solutions. Try this, do that. It's very hard to stand with someone at the cross. No one likes to suffer. None of us seek suffering. But sometimes it's harder for us to see another person suffer. And so I think that's where a lot of the isolation comes in. And so having a community of others who understand, I mean, all of our experiences are unique to us, right? But there's at least some common understanding of the suffering, of the different emotions. And so having that community makes such a difference because people begin to feel seen and heard and understood. And, we can work through grief and those emotions, but we also want to point them toward Christ and toward each other and toward the fruitfulness that God has planned for them. That may include children for some people, But whether or not it includes children, we are all called to fruitfulness, to give life in this world. And so when you're in community, it's a little bit easier, I think, to see that. I know it was for me when I was just sort of on my own. I would just sort of stew in my emotions. Um, so I wish that I had had a Springs in the Desert when we were going through all of it. Somebody, it wouldn't have made it, so much easier. It wouldn't have taken away all the pain, but I think it would have brought a lot of hope to me that I didn't have when I was going through it.
So, walk us through what a family will experience when they contact you at Springs in the Desert.
Sure. So the first thing that they'll do is go through our website, generally speaking, springsinthedesert.org. And so that's kind of like the soft landing because, again, the isolation, there's a lot of shame around infertility. There does not need to be, but very often there is. You feel very inadequate, and so sometimes you need kind of a soft landing, and so that's the website. So you can go into our website. There are a number of resources that are there, things that you can share even with family members or with your pastor, um, especially if around Mother's Day, maybe you don't quite have the courage to talk to Father about Mother's Day and how he can be a little bit more sensitive. So we have a resource for Mother's Day. You can just kind of slip that under his door, and hopefully he will get that message. And of course, we still have our blog, which is so beautiful because it gives an opportunity for people in this community to tell their own stories, which is just really beautiful. It's just a beautiful way of processing and healing. Um, but lots of other great spiritual and emotional kind of accompaniment through the blog. And then you might go a little step further and check out the Springs in the Desert podcast. And one of the people messaged us, this was about a year or two ago, and said, the podcast is like that friend that I can take with me. And so that's, a little step forward, right? Because now maybe you're not communicating like we are, you're not ready for that, but at least now you're hearing voices, and you can hear stories, and you can hear inspiration. And then the next thing might be a virtual event. So we do a Lenten series for 6 weeks every year, and that's over Zoom, and it's presentation and small groups. And then we also do in-person events, retreats, and other kinds of events, really all around the country, wherever we're invited. We do a virtual prayer group every Wednesday. So there's a lot of different ways that you can become involved, whatever your comfort level is. We have a newsletter. We have our weekly well prayer email that goes out, because it's important for us as a community to pray for each other. And I think when we hear the stories and the needs of others, it kind of draws us out of ourselves a little bit. Again, because that's something that I needed, because I was just so focused on myself and oh my goodness, this is so terrible, and God, where are you? And so when we can kind of see what other people are going through and walk along with them, it helps in our own healing.
So, what are some words of encouragement that you would give to a couple that's experiencing infertility?
I would say that regardless of what your circumstance is, God loves you, and your marriage is so good. And our marriages are witnesses. St. Paul says that marriage is this witness. It's this great mystery, right? And what it shows us is the love of Christ for his church. Well, our marriages do that too, even if we don't have children, or if we only have one or two children. Perhaps we hoped that our family would grow larger, and we're dealing with secondary infertility. Perhaps we have children who are in heaven. Regardless of where we are on this path of infertility, our marriages are good, God loves us and he loves our marriages, and our marriages are witnesses in the world to faithfulness, because, you know, let's face it, we live in a world where, if I don't have what I want, if this isn't doing it for me, I'm just going to go and find something else, right? And we see this, sort of celebrity culture with marriage, right? It's, this isn't working out, I'm going to go find somebody else. And so I think we're a witness to what that fidelity looks like. And I think we're also a witness to, like an amazing pro-life witness, because we understand the giftedness of the child, that the child isn't something that we have a right to. It's not simply property or something that we can grasp for ourselves. And we are also radically available to be of service in the world. And oh, the Lord knows that this world needs our service so much. There are so many people who are hurting, who are alone, so many circumstances that we can offer ourselves, whether it's in our extended family. That's one way that Keith and I really try to serve, and where our love becomes fruitful in his large family, in my smaller family, but my elderly dad and others in our family, in our community, in our parish. Um, these are not, it's not the same as having children, but these are not second best. God is not looking at them and saying, well, that's not as good as if you would have had 10 children or whatever. It's necessary. Your service is necessary in the world.
So you've probably worked with hundreds of couples at this
Yep.
point.
Yep.
Can you share a story about a couple that you've worked with that is memorable?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, and we meet so many couples on retreats, and we have a number of people who have actually been with this community pretty much since it has started, and some of them have gone on to kind of take some role on the team, and are helping us with retreats and doing other events. I think, you know, the people who come, it's a very sort of transitional kind of ministry, right? Because some people will end up becoming pregnant, others might end up going the adoption route, and they kind of fall away from needing this particular kind of support. Um, but the most sort of gratifying thing to me is when we get messages, or when people just contact me personally to talk about how they felt so seen and cared for and understood. And the stories of couples who have really come to see that the Lord is not punishing them, but that he has a particular mission for them. Might not be the mission that they thought they were signing up for, right? But that the Lord does have a purpose and a place for them in the church, and has a purpose for their marriage. And so those kinds of stories come in all the time. There's a lot of pain that we receive, a lot of tears that we receive, but we have seen so many instances of healing, or at least of people on the way. And so that's a real privilege for us. It's a privilege for us to receive the tears, and it's a privilege for us to know that it's not us, but that we have created a space where the Holy Spirit can just come in and do his work. And it's just amazing when that happens.
So, are there other ministries like Springs in the Desert that you're aware of? And how do we go about replicating it like all over the country for
So
everybody?
there are definitely more ministries that are kind of cropping up. When we started Springs, or even before that, there really wasn't much of anything. I was on a Catholic Facebook group. There are some things like that. And there are more ministries that are kind of cropping up. But I think what makes Springs in the Desert unique is that our focus is on Christ, not on conception. And so we're not the sort of clearinghouse for the diets and the treatment and which doctor do you go to and that sort of thing. we will certainly answer those questions and point people in those directions. But we really want to be a place of kind of respite from all that, where, you know, we don't have to talk about that. We don't have to talk about whether we're gluten free or not, or, the blood draws and all that kind of thing, because I mean, I know this happened for me. It can get very obsessive, um, you know, Googling and searching and treatments and all of that sort of thing. So we're sort of a place of rest from that, and we want to focus on the spiritual, and also focus on the marriage, focusing on nurturing our marriages and seeing the fruitfulness that God is bringing forth from our marriages right now, whether we end up having children or not. Right now, today, God is calling us to give life, and so how is He calling us to do that? So I think that's what makes us a little bit different. But it's so wonderful to see that, just the issue of infertility is being acknowledged and addressed, and not simply from the treatment standpoint. That there is coming to be much more acknowledgement about the grief, for example, that is associated with infertility. So yeah, I mean, I hope that Springs in the Desert, gets more sort of widespread recognition, and that just individually in parishes, that and dioceses, that there can be a little bit more of a focus on this spiritual and emotional aspect. We have a lot of resources on our website. We have an infertility awareness page. So we have a guide for creating a web page specifically around infertility, and lots of resources. So they are there to be utilized, and whether it's Springs in the Desert or it's just something that a diocese puts together themselves, or a parish, just that acknowledgement that infertility exists and that it's hard means so much, because again, we can just really feel like we're sort of lost among youth and young adults and moms group and Bible study, and we begin to think, wow, we don't really fit anywhere. People can come and find us at springsinthedesert.org. And again, it's that soft landing. And so you can come and, find a lot of resources and a lot of accompaniment. We are also on social media. We're pretty active there. So we have a Facebook public page, and we also have a private group. And so that's a place where you can just come and, kind of get that spiritual support that you need. And we're also really active on Instagram as well. And so we'd love you to come and follow us on Instagram. And we have a lot of great content that goes up there every week. And so there are so many ways that you can get in touch with us. You can also email us, info@springsinthedesert.org. So if you need prayer, if you just need somebody to talk to, if you would like to tell your story and you'd like to write a blog post, or you'd like to sort of encourage and inspire others, get in touch with us, because we're always looking for those stories, and we can always use more workers in the vineyard, because there's plenty to do.
Yes, isn't there? Well, thank you so much, Anne, for being our guest on the PeakDay podcast. I'm sure this is going to be very valuable for a lot of people who may be suffering in silence, and who need that community and encouragement that it sounds like Springs in the Desert will be able to provide.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, oh, our pleasure, definitely.